Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Before Titles. I'm Roger and I'm joined by Lawrence and Jackie as we explore a topic that's at the heart of every strong organization, and that's navigating legal and ethical policies. We're exploring things from data privacy to ethical culture to ethical practices, and we'll be diving into how policies shape those decisions, trust, and impact across the different industries. And I'll get us started with a look at how real world examples highlight why strong ethical frameworks aren't simply just helpful, but they're necessary for effective organizations. So, legal and ethical policies are far more than compliance checkboxes. They really form the backbone of any organization that wants to operate responsibly and build lasting trust. And so, first, I'd like to share a really high profile case that happened last year. And it's when Italy's Data Protection Authority fined OpenAI 50 million euros for failing to provide clear transparency on how user data, especially that of minors, was being collected and processed. So this was beyond malicious oversight, but it was about policy gap, where there was a silence in ethical governance that ended up in regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage. And so, on the contrary, there's organizations that have intentionally woven ethics into their DNA. And there's a 2020 study in Business Horizon, analyzed real-world practices from companies across the U.S. and Spain, and it highlighted three conditions necessary for embodying ethics. It's a sense of responsibility to society, spaces for ethical deliberation, and respect for employee moral autonomy. And it showed that when leaders regularly bring ethical issues into conversation and empower staff to voice their concerns, ethics stops being a clause in a handbook and it really becomes a part of everyday decisions. And so that study really resonates with me on a personal level. In my work, particularly in external affairs and public affairs, I've learned that clear and lived out ethical policies are really what make or break trust. So whether it's publishing information, responding to stakeholders, navigating public feedback, all of it really depends um, and demands more than legal compliance. So it really requires ethical clarity, who decides what gets shared, how are conflicts of interest handled, and critically, what's the escalation path when something feels off. And I've seen teams equipped with feedback channels, open ethic dialogues, and real world scenario training operate with confidence. And mistakes still can occur, but they're caught early, they're owned up quickly, and they're corrected the right way. And so, on the flip side, when those guardrails don't exist, even minor missteps can escalate, creating a confusion, eroding trust, and forcing legal teams to really scramble. And so to me, legal and ethical policies should be more than just tools, but they should be the guiding principles that elevate day-to-day actions. And so now I'll pass it on to Jackie to share her take on the topic.
Yes, thank you for that, Roger. Very interesting stuff. We also, at my agency, we have a lot of client information that we use, and we're starting to look into AI, like you were talking about, but there's a lot of like privacy things that we have to worry about. Like, can we put client information into this AI generator, and then how does that protect that information? So we're still learning to do that. And then we also have a lot of partnerships with law enforcement and therapists and mental health programs. And so we're trying to navigate how to release certain information because ultimately all of our cases go to court. And those prosecutors need information, but there's processes and ways to protect investigative records, and there's a different way to protect mental health records. And so I have to work with my stakeholders to create policies and processes that adhere to legal statutes like the Family Code, the Code of Federal Regulations, and create a policy that works for everybody, that everybody can follow, and that's grounded in, like state laws and rules. So I was able to do that successfully, and I think that makes our process now much more ethically sound. and we are responsible for legal processes after that. And I will pass this over to Mr. McGaffey.
Thank you, Jackie. So I've decided to look at it from a macro standpoint about the way companies do business in general and their impact on the environment. So I was looking at the need for a national policy, one more like a global policy, to keep us all, on the same page in regards to climate change. The U.S. Needs a climate policy that's consistent and stable. And since we keep pulling out of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, then we have to come up with a way so that we can be the leaders in climate change. We can be the ones who affect the change the most. So I started doing some research and found out that our jumping in and out of the Paris Climate Agreement is affecting the way we do business with other countries and then internally as well. Everybody's on a different page, everybody's doing something different, and so we impact the environment in different ways. But if we have a unified approach, we have a better chance to address the issue of climate change from a unified perspective rather than just this divided perspective. So, according to Shapiro and Stefkovich, the ethic of justice serves as a foundation for legal principles and ideas. And so that's kind of the the framework that I was using to build what I call the Washington Climate Accords. And as I was looking at the data, I realized something. If you're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, it's actually down. Greenhouse gas emissions are down, methane emissions are down, nitrous oxide emissions are down. Uh, all of these emissions are down, they're going down. But there was one country that stood out the most that has the most significant drop in emissions across the board. That is the United Kingdom. Of course, they were the ones, France, who came up with the Paris Accord. So we see that there is some type of effect that is happening because they have the biggest drop. So what can we do? Well, instead of not getting involved at all, we have to look out for future generations. We have to look out for how our businesses create products. You were talking about AI earlier. Your AI uses a lot of energy, a lot of batteries, a lot of energy from different sources. So how is that impacting the environment? If we keep all that together, then we'll, on a local level and on a national and global level, we'll remain the leaders like we should be. Well, that's just one example of a macro level policy that affects us on all levels, even into the future. With that, I'll give it back to Roger.
Yeah, thank you for that,
I have a quick
Lawrence.
question.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick y'all's brain for a second. Do y'all think AI could respond with a solution for protecting us from AI in the future? As in the energy situation Lawrence just brought up, do you think we could ask AI, hey, how can we reduce the energy emission? Right? Do you think it could figure something out like that out?
Of course,
Mhm.
of course. I think AI is a good tool for coming up with ideas and solutions. The only thing that I would watch out for is kind of the data set that it's based on. All AIs have to be trained on something, and if it's biased in its programming, then it's going to give biased
Mm-hmm.
answers. Either way,
Mm-hmm.
it could be biased towards extreme bad or good. So that's kind
Mhm.
of the only
Mm-hmm.
fear that I see with AI. Who's programming? Where's it, like you say, with privacy?
Mhm.
Where's this information going? Who can see this behind the scenes? Who can
Mm-hmm.
interject? Who can
Mm-hmm.
who can manipulate what it's saying, and we don't ever know.
Mm-hmm. Right, because it's all still built by humans.
Right.
Hmm.
Roger, what you think, man?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, especially when you were talking about the demand for energy. AI, even as we're talking right now, AI is already demanding so much renewable and
Hmm.
battery storage infrastructure. You could take Amazon. Their Amazon Web Services is already demanding battery energy storage systems,
Exactly.
which my company is an example of one of the construction companies who builds those. So the more that people are relying on AI, it requires more energy and it's requiring more battery storage systems um, around the world. So I think that there's a solution there. It's just how do we keep this long term, especially if the demand keeps going up. Mhm. Mhm.
What a time to be alive.
Yes. Yeah. So, and so with that, it brings us to the end of today's episode. And so from ethical leadership to legal safeguards and the gray areas in between. One of the main things that's clear is that these policies aren't really about just risk management. They're really about building trust, setting the tone for culture, and making sure that leadership is rooted in integrity and not just titles alone. And so before we go, I'll leave everyone with this question. If a company's policies looks ethical on paper, but the day-to-day culture doesn't reflect them, does that organization still count as ethical? It's something worth thinking about, especially as we all continue growing in leadership. But thanks for tuning in to Leadership Before Titles, and that's a wrap for this semester. Thank you.
Bye.